media. Yes. Okay. I got
That's awesome.
it.
All right, I think we'll get started since we're at 9 o'clock. And as people come in, they can join and listen in as they join the Zoom this morning. So good morning and welcome to the UW Extension Division of Extension WISE Wisconsin Virtual Learning Series. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Katie Gellings and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I'm just going to go over a few announcements before we get started. During the presentation, please keep your microphone muted unless there's an opportunity for engagement or questions. Feel free to post questions in the chat as we go, and we'll make sure to address them at the end of the session or when it's appropriate throughout the session. As a reminder, there is closed captioning for those of you that would like to use it. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. Just click on the CC icon to enable it. Our session will be recorded today and sent out after it has been captioned. I know the first couple sessions have been posted on the website now. So you can go back and view those if you want to rewatch them or if you've missed any of them. We post a link in the chat to the evaluation for today's session at the end, so please take a moment to fill it out for us. We appreciate your feedback and it helps inform our programming so that we can best meet your needs for the future. So thank you again for joining us. Today's session is called Wise Money, and it is presented by Jenny Abel and Jonathan Ferguson. So I will hand it off to Jenny and Jonathan to formally introduce themselves and get started this morning.
Thanks, Katie. Much appreciated. And thanks to everybody for joining today. And to Katie and Amanda for helping Jenny and I out managing all the things that come with managing a technology presentation. So yeah, today's session is called Wise Money. My name is Jonathan Ferguson, and I intentionally wore, actually, the same sweater from my picture today just to throw people off. I thought about that this morning, and I thought, I'm going to wear that. But that is me. I'm a financial capability specialist at UW Extension's financial security program. Just a little bit about my previous work history. My career has been primarily in public service, and in the more recent past, I've been really focused on financial education, financial planning, so on and so forth, and doing that in a way that can support the state of Wisconsin. And so that brings me to UW Extension in my current role. Jenny, are there things you want to add about your previous work history?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Abel. I'm the Financial Security Outreach Program Manager with Extension. I've been in this role for just a little bit over 4 years. And so I'm relatively new to Wisconsin, but I've been working in Extension for gulp almost 24 years because I was working in Virginia for Virginia Cooperative Extension as a county educator for a long time, doing direct financial education there. So I'm always really excited to get to be in this role of sharing financial education and information, because Jonathan and I are typically behind the scenes and don't get to do direct education. So it's great to get to be with you all today. And I'll hand it back to Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So we'll go ahead and move through our session. So money is obviously a very important topic for everyone. And we also know that money can be quite emotional and sometimes pretty intimidating. So the fact that you're even here today at today's session is a really important thing, and we appreciate you taking the time to do so and also having the courage to do so. So one of the things I wanted to start with was an affirmative. I like to start things with affirmative thoughts about the topic. And one of the things that we know through research studies is that actually older adults tend to have higher financial literacy levels compared to other age groups. So we titled the session Wise Money, and you all do bring a lot of wisdom to this session here today. So you do know a lot, even if you maybe don't feel that you do. Our data shows that you actually do know a lot, and which is good because there are also many topics, many issues that older navigate, things that you must navigate related to your finances as you age, including public benefits, which seem to always have some new bend or some new slight change or large change, and it can be tough to navigate those things. But you all are ready to do it, and you do it well because you have a lot of money smarts already. And what we're hoping today is just maybe help you sharpen those and provide a little bit more information. All right, so today's focus, primarily, like the first bullet point is there at the top for a reason, because we want to answer your questions. And so we've put together these slides and this content with the idea that it will address a lot of the questions that you all have. We appreciate those who submitted questions ahead of time, because that actually helped us provide a focus for our content here today. But we don't anticipate our slides are necessarily going to answer every question that you have. And so that's why we're lucky to have the ability for you to put questions in the chat. And we will have time at the end of the presentation to just have discussion as well. So answer your questions, discuss ways to manage common financial challenges that you may face. And then we're also going to talk about some economic policies that impact older adults as well, things that have changed recently that may be important for your financial life. All right, so some common challenges that we find that older adults have are on the screen there. So this is a challenge for everyone, preventing scams and fraud. It's not just older adults who have to deal with that. Everyone does now, but it's important for you. Investments and retirement. All right, some of you all may already be in your retirement phase of life or looking forward to it. And that has some impact or at least influence on things you may want to do with your money. There are some personal things related to your family and friends and your network that you may want to consider. So we'll touch on those. We'll also talk about estate and legacy planning. We'll have a section on that, which is in some ways connected to long-term care. So just the ability to take care of yourself, keep yourself healthy for the duration of your life. And as you age, it becomes more and more important to have access to proper health care and health support and wellness support. And that can come with some costs. And so we want to talk about what those may be and how to manage them. And then we also want to talk about funeral costs, preparing for end of life and what that looks like from a financial perspective. So those are the things we have lined up. And I will turn things over to Jenny to get us started.
Yeah, now one thing I'll say is that we could probably an entire session on each of these topics, each of the ones that Jonathan mentioned that were on the previous slide. And so we're only going to be able to touch the surface of a lot of these. But if some of you have been to the Wise Wednesdays presentations in previous years, you'll remember that last year we did do a lengthy session on frauds and scams that was done by two of our colleagues from Iowa and Wapaka counties. And they did a great job. And so we can certainly revisit any of these topics in the future if you want more information on this. So just quickly, as Jonathan said, frauds and scams impact everybody, no matter what their age. But statistics show that they impact people at different ages a little bit differently. So we've just collected a little bit of data and information here. So this first one shows how on average fraud and scams impact people in their 50s. And I'm on the lower end of that age group right now. And so we can see that the top 5 scams that affected folks in their 50s were online shopping, business imposter scams, like when you get an email from a bank, you know, it makes it look like it's from your bank or from a business that you have had relations with. It makes it from that business, but really it's not. And then investments, miscellaneous investments, romance scams. This is one that we see that impacts this age group and people younger than this quite a bit. And government imposters is the number 5 one here. The payment method for this age group, the biggest one is credit cards, with debit card being the second one. And then the way that folks in this age group typically have been contacted by the scam artists and the fraudsters is via websites or apps. And then, as you can see, social media is kind of a close second, with phone call, other email, and text being other ones for this. And then if we look at people in their 70s, the makeup is a little bit different, although you'll notice that the first 2 loss report areas are the same for this age group too. It's also online shopping and business imposter scams. Online shopping has just become so pervasive that that's impacting people of all ages. So I thought it was interesting here that the payment method for this age group is gift cards or reload cards. Reload cards can also be called prepaid cards. So they are similar to debit cards, except where a debit card acts the same as a check. So when you use that at the store, the money comes directly out of your bank account or your credit union account. A reload card or a prepaid card is one where you load money onto it, or someone else has loaded money onto it, and so you're limited to spending only that amount of money that's on that card. And so I was wondering, why is it that this was so high for folks in this age group? And one thing is, so if you think back to when those stimulus payments were issued to many of us during COVID, some of us got $600 or $1,200, depending on how many people in our family a year. And 4 million of those payments were issued on this type of card, this reload card or prepaid card. And so that may be why we're seeing such a high incidence of that. And then the contact method for this age group, and my mom, by the way, is at the upper end of this group. And so it's phone calls. And again, that's not too surprising, because although all ages are using technology, the fraudsters and scam artists tend to still prey on older adults via phone calls, although we can see that email also makes up a big part of this. What can we do to help prevent scams and fraud? So there are 2 different protections that you can put on your credit report. And your credit report is a document that is issued by the 3 national credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. It used to be that we could only get 1 copy for free from each of those bureaus once a year. But back in October, that changed to once a week. Well, it actually, during COVID, it changed to once a week. It became permanent in October of 2023 that we can now get those for free once a year. So, and those are the reports that show a record of our credit use history, of our payments on credit cards and on loans, and also if we have overdue or unpaid bills on a few other things. And so one of the things that we can do is we can put a security freeze on our report. And that means that no one can open credit in our name unless that freeze is lifted. And that includes us, actually. So if you are at a department store, for example, and you're buying some clothes, say, oh, if you open our store credit card today, you can save 20%. Going to be easy for you to do that, because you'll first have to call and lift that freeze. So that's just something to think about when you're placing that freeze on your report. But if you think it's unlikely that you are going to acquire a lot of new credit in the future, that can be a really good method, because that provides a great deal of protection for you. But also, like we say here, if you think that you're going to be moving or renting a new place, you would need to lift that freeze before anyone can do a credit check on you. And then the other type is a fraud alert. And this doesn't have that same level of where the freeze has to be lifted, but it triggers extra verification. It triggers the lender to do extra checks to make sure that the person who's applying is really you and it's not someone who is who's trying to impersonate you. And so also you can set this up through one bureau and that bureau will contact the other two. So you could set it up through TransUnion, for example, and they will contact Equifax and Experian. And there are three types. So you can put an initial hold or alert on for 1 year, and then you can get a 7-year extension. And also lots of active duty military are encouraged to do this because if they are serving overseas and they are frequently victims of identity theft or fraud because they're not here to monitor what's going on with their accounts. And so this is something that active duty members do quite a bit. So what are signs that something might not quite right? So scam artists have gotten very, very clever. So like when you get those emails that are trying to mimic Chase Bank or Wells Fargo or Bank of America or whatever, or Amazon, they look very, very much like the real thing. But there are some clear signs that you can look for to show that this is not above board. So if you are pressured to take action immediately, that's a good sign that this is not something that you should do. If there's no clear policy for what happens if you need to return merchandise or if you need to cancel a service that you've signed up for, that also is a sign. If there are upfront fees that they're charging that aren't clearly explained, that's another good sign that this isn't something that you want to do. Complete paperwork, if there's confusing fine print, and also prepayment penalties. Now, sometimes prepayment penalties are legal. A lot of times on mortgages, those can be included or have been in the past. But if you see that's a sign that this could be a scam. So those are things to watch out for. So then how do we avoid scams? How do we make sure that we don't become a victim of these things? It's important not to make any decisions in the moment. Ask for some time, and if it's legitimate, they'll let you have that time. If this is someone who's called you, pressuring you, you can just hang up. Also, be very careful about not sharing any of your personal or financial information. So if they ask for your bank account number or your social security number, be very careful about who you're sharing that with. Also ask for the name of the person that you're talking to and the name of the business so that you can check up on them, and ask that they mail additional information to you. And again, if they're legitimate, they'll be happy to do that. And if they hesitate, then that's another sign that this is something to avoid. So those are just a few pointers and tips. And I think now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Scams, fraud are such a significant piece of what we all have to deal with. But those are some great tips to be able to avoid and know the signs of them. One way to help avoid them also is to have a network of people who are supporting you. So we can't always, as individuals, catch everything that's in front of us. There's just too much stuff out there. But if we have people, loved ones around us, and a network of people who are supporting us and we're supporting, then we're going to be more likely to to recognize scams and fraud. Speaking of that network, financial advisors could be a part of your network. It's quite possible that that's something that you want to consider. And so the question of should you get financial advice is going to be an individual one, but we know that it can be helpful for many people. So on the screen, you'll see various topics that you can consider getting financial advice for, from putting together a budget to managing taxes. Taxes in our country are pretty complex. If our Internal Revenue Code was a book, it would be lots of pages. Actually, I'll post that question. If you have a thought on how many pages that book would be, go ahead and put it in a chat. I actually know the answer to that. But if our Internal Revenue Code was a book that you carried around, how many pages would it be? Insurance, there are lots of different types of insurance plans that we will need to consider. Retirement savings, which you all may be considering as well, buying a home, or maybe even considering how you manage your home. Sometimes older adults are considering, well, what are the possibilities of using the equity in your home, selling it, a reverse mortgage, so on and so forth. So there are lots of possibilities. I love that. 2,500 is a good guess. And the chances, like, I would have not gotten it right. So if you just want to take a chance and put it in the chat, feel free to do so. I'll give everyone an opportunity to do that, and I'll answer that question in just a few minutes. But what is a financial advisor? So the important thing to know is that term, financial planner, financial advisor, financial counselor, financial coach. These topics, these labels, I should say, don't necessarily have a single definition. And so that means that anyone can call themselves a financial advisor or a financial planner. They don't need to actually meet any specific educations or license requirements to use those terms. So it's important to know that when you're trying to navigate all of the different financial advising and financial planning services that are out there. But one of the things you can do is talk with financial advisors and learn more about them and how they can help you in your specific situation to determine, hey, is this someone I should hire based on my specific needs? And they will have designations and things that, like, letters behind their name. And sometimes those things can mean a lot and can be very important for your situation. And sometimes that may not be the case. And so the next slide we're going to go over, we'll review some of those designations, some of those letters behind that person's name. So the answer to the question is, if you're curious about the IRC code, the Internal Revenue Code, is over 70,000 pages. 70,000 pages. That's how complex our Internal Revenue Code is. So it's a pretty big book. If you want to work out, you can print it and carry it around, and you'll be the strongest person ever. All right. Yes, 70,000. I know it does seem crazy. That's a lot of pages. Okay, so what to look for in your financial advisor. Designations can help you understand an advisor's training and focus, and you'll see some common ones on the screen. I will say there are many, many different designations and focus areas of financial advisors. And so there's a link on the screen that you'll be able to review later if you're so interested, because the person you're working with or who you may consider working with could have a designation or letters behind their name that are not the 5 that are called out on the screen. But I did want to call these out because these are the most common ones that we look for and we see among those in the financial advising realm. So they all do different things, as you'll see. Like, as an example, if you're looking for a stock picker, an accredited financial counselor is probably not your target person. They're going to think about your financial picture, how it's impacting you and the decisions that you make, and how you can kind of grow your confidence to make decisions, and also inform you about financial topics. But it's really about you as a whole person. And you can take that on the opposite end for a registered representative, also previously known as a stockbroker. And their job really is to sell you investments. And because of that, they tend to know a lot about specific investment types. And so you're going to have lots of variation, but it's important to know what those designations mean and what they actually can provide you and what value they bring to you if you decide to hire someone. So those are some common designations. We can talk more about that later if we want. Specifically, though, we want you to know the term fiduciary. A fiduciary is someone who holds a legal or ethical responsibility to you at all times. So when you're talking to a financial advisor, it's important to know if they're a fiduciary. If they are, then that means the advice they provide for you, the work they do for you, needs to be in your best interest above everyone else's at all times, including their own. The challenge is that many financial advisors are not required to act in your best interest above all else. And so that's why a critical question is, do you have a fiduciary responsibility? Are you a fiduciary? These are things that you can ask. And if they are, great, you can take that in and evaluate that how you like. And if they're not, that doesn't mean it's not that you shouldn't work with them necessarily, but it does mean you should know what impacts their advice to you, which could be something that's in their own best interest. Okay, so investment decisions as you age. The general idea in the financial planning community is that as we age, the things that we put our money in should become more conservative over time. Because as you age, you're going to be more concerned with the return of the money that you put in an investment and not necessarily as focused on the return on the money you put in the investment, right? So if you are a 20-year-old person and you put $1,000 in an investment that you're not going to seek to take out for 30, 40 years, then your hope is like, I hope that this grows a ton over that time. But as you get older, let's say you're a 65-year-old person, that same $1,000, depending on your situation, you may want to put in an investment so it doesn't lose out to inflation and things like that. However, you're very concerned about, if I put $1,000 in this investment, I want to at least be able to get my $1,000 back. So you're going to be more concerned with usually getting your money back as opposed to growing it a ton over time. And those things are usually going to be done through more conservative investments like bonds, certificates of deposit, treasury securities, which are basically when you loan the money to the government, money market accounts, which are going to be similar to savings accounts at a bank, but come with a few more restrictions. So you're going to be investing probably more conservatively, but many financial advisors recommend still having 50% or more in stocks, which tend to grow and be more volatile, because you do in your retirement probably still have a long life to live here. So more conservative, but not necessarily no stocks, no volatility, no high appreciation investments at all. But the most important thing I'll point out here is that you should invest based on your comfort level, because that's going to be the most important thing. If you can't sleep at night because you're worried about your money in the stock market or something like that, that's not going to be a decision that supports your wellness, which in the end, that's what money is for, to support your wellness. All right, I'll turn things back over to Jenny.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some legislation that was passed in the last few years that impacts how retirement savings get taxed and when we have to pull them out. So the Secure Act was first passed in 2019, and Secure stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. Oh, Kurt, did you have a question? Oh, Okay. And then a revision of this act was passed at the very end of 2022, and that's called Secure 2.0. So we're going to talk about both of these. And both of these acts impact minimum distributions, which are typically referred to as RMDs. And if you worked for an employer that provided a 401k or a 403b or a 457 savings option, then you'll likely be familiar with these, because during your employment, you and hopefully your employer contributed to those accounts, and so that then you would have that money available in retirement, and you can withdraw with no penalties or fees from those accounts after you're 59 and a half. And the thing is that your contributions to those accounts were made with pre-tax dollars. Also, if you have a traditional IRA, a traditional individual retirement account, RMDs impact those as well. And so RMDs say that at a certain age, you must start withdrawing money from those accounts so that you can pay taxes on the earnings, because your earnings in those accounts haven't been taxed at all, and the government wants to get the taxes where they can. So what happened with these accounts is this original Secure Act that was passed in 2019, it moved the age when you have to start taking those distributions from 70 and a half to 72. And then the second iteration of the Secure Act moved that age to 73 for those who are born between 1951 and 1959, and to 75 for everyone born after 1960. So what this means is that you can wait. If you have other sources of income, you could wait until you're 75 if you're born after 1960 to start taking those distributions from accounts. And then that means that you don't have to pay tax on your earnings in those accounts until you start taking those distributions. So, like I said, if you've got other sources of income, that can really be a bonus to you, and that can positively impact your tax burden if you can wait until that age to start taking those distributions. I will say there's often some confusion around this regarding Roth IRAs. Roth IRAs, you're putting that money in, those are post-tax dollars, and when you put the money in, you don't get a tax credit for that, whereas you do with a traditional IRA. And so Roth IRAs do not have required minimum distributions. So after age 59 and a half, you can take out that money penalty free and free of fees, and also free of taxes. Okay. So we got one of the questions that we got when we asked Sarah to put together a survey a couple of weeks ago is, how much should you have in a savings account? How much should you keep liquid? How much should you keep as cash? And the thing is, so I have a general recommendation here, but I'm going to talk a lot about how this is very general, and really it depends on your situation, because when I was looking into this to see what various experts recommend, it's all over the board. So this 6 months recommendation that I have here, this is kind of standard for folks who are still working, because if they were to lose employment all of a sudden, they would need to have a cushion to draw on. But when you're retired, and if you've got guaranteed sources of income, for example, if you've got Social Security that you can count on, if you're one of the lucky few who has a pension, if you've got that regular source of money coming in, you don't have to worry about it being cut off. I mean, we keep hearing stories about Social Security, but hopefully we don't have to worry about those being ended or canceled at any point. So if you've got those regular sources of income, then you may not need to have such a cushion. On the other hand, a lot of experts say that once you're retired, you need to have a bigger cushion in cash. And a lot of experts recommend that you have between 12 and 24 months of your living expenses. And the reason for that is because if there's all of a sudden a need to, for example, move from your home, which is perhaps paid off, into a senior living facility, and we're going to talk more about those in a little bit, if you have that situation, then all of a sudden your monthly costs are likely to go up quite a bit. And so you may want to have more of a cushion so that you're ready to cover those things. So I included an example here using this 6 months example. But really, I would say the recommendation here is to take a look at your own situation and see what you're comfortable with and see what resources you have at your disposal. You can use this 6 months as a very general guideline, but then also think about the other factors that I talked about. So we also got a question about what things to think about as you're approaching retirement. So obviously a big one is, what are the sources of income that you will have at your disposal? And also, at what point do you want to start drawing from Social Security? You can start as young as 62. But a lot of experts recommend waiting till your full retirement age, which for most of us is 67. And then some say if you can wait until you're 70, your monthly benefit will be higher. And so if you can't afford to wait that long, that's a good idea. But obviously it's based on your needs. And then again, you may have pension or investments or wages from part-time work. Those could be other sources of income. But just think about what's the whole pie, the retirement income pie that you'll be able to put there. And then, of course, thinking about healthcare needs. These tend to be a lot more expensive as we age than as we're working, for a couple of reasons. For most of us, medical things come up more as we age, and also we don't have the benefit of an employer-sponsored plan to help us out. Medicare, of course, helps with this. But as you're signing up for Medicare, there are a lot of choices to think about. Do you need, you'll get Part A, but do you also need Parts B and C and D? What are the supplements that you'll need for that? And just a note here that you can sign up for Medicare starting 3 months before your 65th birthday, and you have until 3 months after your birthday to sign up. So you actually have a total of 7 months, because your birthday month doesn't count in those. So for example, if your birthday is in April, you can start signing up in January. You have until July to sign up for Medicare. And then to think about, how do you want to spend your time in retirement? And are there things that you need to set money aside for, like travel or new hobbies or visiting family that may be far away? I think in these sessions, other folks have talked a lot about the importance of staying socially connected. So thinking about that when you don't have a community of coworkers any longer, that's important to think about. And then also thinking about what are your priorities around charitable contributions and volunteering. So those are just a few things to think about. And I think I'm handing it back to Jonathan now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cindy. I won't spend a ton of time on these slides, which is not an indication that they're not important. It's just I want to make sure we get to the other things and make time for your questions today. So what we find nowadays is that there are a lot more multi-generational households where you may have grandparents, all the way through grandchildren or even great grandchildren in the same home. There are a variety of reasons why that may be the case. Some of it could be unique to your family or your specific culture. But we see that this is growing throughout the United States and just across the board. And a lot of it has to do with possibly how some of the younger generations are doing things at older ages than their parents or grandparents did, such as moving out of the home, having children, so on and so forth. So as a result of that, it's important for, I think, everyone involved to consider, like, what are the benefits and challenges of this situation, specifically for the group and then also for each individual. So to help with this, it can be important to consider some specific questions. Like, one, how do I feel about this? If this is even a possibility or could happen, what are my thoughts? Oftentimes, the best thoughts we have come in our own reflection or in discussion with those who we care about. And so it's important to consider that question. And then from a financial perspective, just thinking about how you're going to support each other so that everything's clear and everyone's on the same page, I think could be really helpful. So if you live in a multi-general household, it's good to know, like, what's your plan to cover the expenses, how you're going to support the household and others, and how they will do the same for you. All right. Estate and legacy planning is important for everyone. So estate planning is a gift, and this is on the screen. I think it's important to say it's a gift you can give your loved ones. So if you have people in your life that you cherish, planning ahead for your passing can help them. Obviously, if I think back to some of the experiences I've had when I've lost a loved one, it's been emotional for a variety of reasons, and my head I wasn't necessarily thinking as clearly as I would on a typical day, which I think is pretty normal. But having an estate plan can help someone who was in my situation have like a set of instructions for things to do to carry out without having necessarily the heavy load of needing to make decisions about every single little thing. And so it can be important for anyone to have a estate plan, any adult. It can be important, but especially as we age, it becomes more important. So why should you create an estate plan? I've talked about a few reasons. You can reduce the stress on loved ones, but you also get to determine who gets what, right? So when you think about the things that are important to you, like I think about my partner who received her grandmother's engagement ring. That was something that her grandmother thought was very important, should go specifically to her. And she actually thought that out and made a decision about that, which is different than some of the other things that she had that she thought might go specifically to other loved ones. So you get to determine what goes where, who gets what. And it's very clear. You also can minimize taxes and probate costs. So when someone passes in their estate, the things they own needs to be distributed. The government often is involved in the process to do that, to ensure that things go smoothly and everything's correct, so on and so forth. If there are instructions written down, a plan, it makes that process much simpler. And so you minimize the costs and the time that are associated with that, which is called probate. It's also the only legal way to name a guardian of minor children. Which is important, right? So if something were to happen to you or any parent, it's important to know if they have a minor child, like, what's the care for that child going to look like in that situation. And also, it's important because it can grant authority and rights to your committed partner if you're not legally married. So when you're legally married, especially in the state of Wisconsin, there are some assumptions that can be made about your estate planning because we're a community property state. If you're not married, then that looks very different. But marriage isn't the only way, obviously, to basically understand that an individual has a committed partner. There are many reasons why someone may not get married. So, as an example, creating an estate plan can help you with that. So here are the ways you can get started. Understand that an estate plan is going to cost you time and or money. but everything of value usually costs us time and or money, right? So no matter what, if you've got something valuable in your life, most of the time you had to like dedicate some part of your life to it. And so one of the ways to get started is with a great course. I won't I won't promote it too much, but it's called Planning Ahead. It's offered by UW Extension. You've probably heard of this in previous sessions, but it's a fantastic opportunity for anyone who's thinking about getting a start with estate planning. It's a fantastic course. So you can talk with an estate planning attorney. So that's someone you can hire, or you can talk with your loved ones about it. So the best way to get started is the way that you feel most comfortable and the way that you're actually going to get started. And those are just some options. All right, back to you, Jenny.
All right. I was also going to put in a plug for the Planning Ahead course, and I see Diane is also putting in a plug in the chat for us. Thanks for that, Diane. So a lot of the topics that we're talking about today are covered much more in depth during that, including this next one, long-term care planning. And Alicia, yeah, I was just going to ask if someone could put in something about how to sign up for the spring statewide Planning Ahead course that we're doing starting in April. So yeah, thanks so much for doing that, Alicia. Yep, and so you can sign up there. It's a 7-session course, and Alicia, Katie, and Amanda, who are on the call, they all frequently teach that course and do an excellent job, and it's free. So moving into long-term care planning. Oh, and also I wanted to know that we are covering a lot of information today, and we're not really doing what we would normally do and provide pauses for questions. So if you've got questions, I invite you to put those into the chat, and whichever one of us isn't speaking at the time, Jonathan or myself, we will do our best to answer those. And we're also going to try to leave some time at the end for a few questions. So on to long-term care planning, and we're going to talk in a second about long-term care insurance, but basically long-term care planning and concerns what ways are you going to plan for taking care of your needs if you're no longer able to do all of the activities of daily living, and if you come to a point where you need some extra help with that, either by hiring in-home care, so someone who would come into your home and help with some things, or to a housing facility that can provide levels of assistance. And so if you want to age in place, which most of us do, AARP did a survey a few years ago, and I forget the exact number, but it was something like 90% of respondents said they wanted to age in place, which isn't surprising, right? We want to stay in our homes if we can. So if you want to try to stay in your home as long as possible, think about what modifications might need to be made. Like, do you need to install ramps if you might have mobility issues? What are the supports that already exist in your community? I know that in other sessions of Wise Wednesdays, the topic of senior villages has come up, where there's sort of, I think, Madison may be starting something like, I don't think it exists in many other places in the state, where there's a network of people you can call upon who can help with like rides to doctor's appointments or rides to the grocery store or help with mowing the lawn. So it would be great if we had more of those that we could turn to. Also thinking about, what does in-home care cost? And we're going to look at that on the next slide. And also, what transportation options are available in your area? Most parts of our state have very limited public transportation, but some do have services that are geared specifically toward older adults. So it's into those. And then thinking about moving into a facility, think about, do you want a place that offers the full continuum of care? So the ability to start in independent, for example, and then move into assisted, and then into skilled nursing care or memory care if you need. Does the facility charge an enrollment fee? A lot of those facilities do, but then you still have to pay monthly fees. And we're going to talk a little bit about why they would do that. What does that enrollment fee cost? And how will you cover those costs? So, so long-term care insurance, this is something that probably lots of folks have heard about, and it is a way to help you cover your costs if you need in-home care or care in a facility. The thing is these plans can be pretty expensive depending on what age you start paying the premiums. But the younger you start, the lower they'll be. But of course, the longer you'll have to pay them. So if you start in your 30s, you may get a pretty low monthly rate, but those rates can go up. And if you start in your 30s, that means you'll need to keep paying those premiums until you need that long-term care insurance. It's also good to think about what are all the options available for funding long-term care. What savings do you have that can cover these costs? Or are you in a situation where you would be able to qualify for Medicaid or other forms of public assistance? And so, yeah, so insurance can be just one of your options for this. So I'm going to quickly share a personal example. So I've been my in-laws live in Virginia. They're in their 90s and they're still living in their own home, but they've been starting to have recent incidents, including falls, that are having us look into long-term care for them. They actually do have a long-term care insurance plan, and so we look to see what it covers, and it covers $56 a day for in-home care and $112 a day for facility care in a facility. The thing is I did the math on that, and that $112 works out to about $3,400 a month. And one of the facilities that we were looking at to move them to cost $12,000 a month. Things are crazy in the DC area. Oh my goodness, prices, yikes. So that would mean that they would still have to come up with, more than 2/3 of the money to cover the costs there. So the long-term care insurance policy that they bought in the 80s and that they've been paying premiums on won't necessarily provide all of the help that they need. So things to consider if you're thinking about buying long-term care insurance, because you can buy long-term care at any age. You can still do this. And of course, the older you are, the higher your monthly premiums will be. So these are some of the questions to ask yourself. What are your chances of needing long-term care? And I think another statistic that I saw is that 2/3 of us are likely to need some form of long-term care as we get older. Why are you buying it? Is it because savings aren't sufficient? Yeah, and will you be able to cover the premiums, those monthly premiums? And that question that I mentioned before, might you be able to rely on things like Medicaid or other public benefits to cover the costs? So just lots of things to think about before you buy long-term care insurance. Also, in order for long-term care insurance benefits to be triggered, there's usually a waiting period, and it varies. Some policies have a 90-day waiting period, which means you have to fund the first 3 months yourself. And also you have to show that you are unable to do at least one of the 6 activities of daily living. And so those are things like bathing or dressing yourself, or being able to move yourself from one spot to another in the home, and feeding yourself, things like that. So be in a state where you can't do one of those things before most policies will be triggered. There's this helpline, and you have these slides, so you can refer back to them for this. But this is the Medigap helpline, is a great source of info to help you think through long-term care. Oops, the formatting got a little skewed on this. Apologies for that. So thinking about the costs of long-term care and facilities in Wisconsin. So average in-home care cost in Wisconsin is $26 an hour. currently. So that's to have someone come into your home and provide care. To move into a senior living facility, the prices range. You may say, Jenny, why are you even providing these ranges? They're so, you know, $7,000 to $14,000 a month for skilled nursing care. Well, which is it? Is it going to be 7 or 14? How do I plan for that? Or for this assisted, 4,500 to 10,000? That's a huge range. Why even bother having ranges like this? And the thing is that it really does vary a lot depending on your geography in the state and depending on the facility. So I'm going to share another personal example. I just moved my mom into a senior living facility 2 years ago, and we looked at a lot of different places and prices, and she wanted to go into an independent. She's still in very good health, and so, but she also wanted a place that had that continuum of care so that if she needed it, she wouldn't have to go somewhere else to go into assisted or skilled nursing or memory care. So, one of the places we looked at charged like $2,300 a month, and another one had an enrollment fee of at least almost $500,000, and then they still charged $4,000 a month in monthly fees. But that place had 3 restaurants. It's Michigan. It had a pool. It's got an art studio, whereas the place that charged $2,300 a month is much more bare bones. So just like with buying housing, your housing choices can vary widely, and the prices can vary a lot. So it's just important to your needs, and also really think about whether or not you have the ability to and are willing to pay those enrollment fees at the places that have them, because what they can do is they can guarantee you a certain monthly amount that won't change, or they guarantee you a spot at the facility if you should have a financial hardship. So they can provide some peace of mind, but those are very large upfront costs. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Jonathan, and hopefully we still have a little bit of time left.
Yeah, we talked a lot today. We got a lot of information, but I feel better about it because these were addressing questions that were submitted previously. And so it's really hopefully been focusing on the things that people really want to know. So planning for funeral costs, much to like what Jenny was just saying, it ranges quite a bit. The median cost in Wisconsin is about $7,500, but that's gonna depend on a variety of decisions and details about everybody's individual situation. But that gives you a ballpark. Cremations tend to have lower costs, but again, that can vary, but generally that's the case. An important point is, if possible, it's best to have these funds in an account that's easily accessible by whoever is going to be responsible for carrying all this out. That's a critical thing to know. So they can just go to the account, get the money, and use it for what they need to. Some resources that we have here, you also have in the slide deck, so I won't go over too much more in there other than to say that planning ahead's awesome. Amanda's awesome. Katie's awesome. Everybody else who teaches it is awesome. So you should definitely take planning ahead if you're interested in learning more about those topics. And now we have time for questions and discussion for whoever wants to stay on. We'll certainly stay on to field questions. I realize we're about at the hour, but we'll open it up for folks who are interested. Thanks, Amanda, for putting the evaluation in the chat. So for anyone who does need to run to whatever's next for today, we would greatly appreciate you completing that evaluation. For others, we'll stay for questions. And you can put those in the chat or raise your hand or unmute. Luckily, we have people helping us today manage that. And if you've messaged me or any of the other folks directly, we'll follow up with you because I know that may have happened as well.
Would you say that long-term care is for people who have a lot of assets they want to protect then? Considering that it seems to not be as valuable, like you were talking about, your relatives who like it's only going to cover a fraction of what they thought it was going to cover. And so like their assets are essentially going to be wiped out anyways, even though they've been paying into this their whole lives.
Yeah, I mean, so in general, long-term care insurance is for folks who are sort of in the middle of the spectrum. They don't qualify for public assistance and they don't have enough money to pay these huge costs that come with long-term care. And so that's why when you're shopping for long-term care insurance, it's really important to look at what is that benefit going to be? How much are you actually going to get? Like in the case of my in-laws, yeah, we were shocked. So the in-home amount, I actually didn't do the homework to see what's the average hourly cost in Northern Virginia for that, but I would imagine it's higher in there than in Wisconsin. But if we use that $26 an hour rate, that would only get them 2 hours a day of in-home care. And perhaps that's all they would need. But yeah, that $112 is barely going to scratch the surface at those facilities. So that's why when you're shopping around, it's really important to ask those questions, like how much of a benefit am I going to get from this policy? Because yeah, if it's not going to be sufficient, and frankly, so my in-laws are still in their home. We haven't moved them yet because of this quandary of how would we pay for it, because they don't have the resources to cover the extra, what would that be, 8,600 that they would need to in their case. They don't have enough for that.
It's a great question. And you did a great job answering it, Jenny. Thanks for bringing in your personal experiences with it. All right. What else haven't we answered? We talked about a lot, but we certainly didn't talk about everything. And so I assume there might be some other questions out there. So we'll hang on for everyone who may have them. And again, feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand or unmute. All right, I'll double check, make sure I haven't missed anything in the chat.
I have one more. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but oh, it looks like maybe Karen's coming on. I'll let Karen ask hers.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alicia. Go ahead.
Well, I was kind of this idea of needing 6 months worth of income saved up is kind of daunting, especially what if you're someone who is in a fixed income and you're just realizing this now. That's kind of a big amount of money to try to think about being able to save. And so I guess I was thinking about the number of, I heard recently at a conference that the number of older people re-entering the workforce is at the highest rate, and that it's actually one of the biggest populations to, I don't know how they put it. That's why I'm kind of confused. But have you heard anything about that, about older people re-entering the workforce?
Yeah, I know I've heard those same statistics that you have, Alicia, and Jonathan. I know you track this a lot more. So anything?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend for a variety of reasons. One, like the recent, well, I guess since 2020, the higher inflation costs. It's just been helpful for people who have the ability to go back into the workforce to kind of stabilize their financial life as much as possible. But also a part of it is a lot of folks wanting to keep engaged in some way from a professional standpoint. Um, we're living longer and healthier lives generally across the board. Of course, that's going to be specific to each individual, but the data shows generally across the board that we are. And so sometimes folks want to still be engaged in that way, but not have it necessarily be the primary piece of their life in the same way that a full-time 40+ hour a week job might be. So you might see some folks who are working part-time to help balance costs, but also just for personal engagement and desire to stay involved and connected to people. Yeah, that's a good one. Karen, did you have one?
Yes. I'm sorry. Did someone?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to jump in and add and say again that 6-month guide, I mean, that it feels sometimes like we almost shouldn't say it because everyone's situation is so different.
Yeah.
And so, kind of like I was saying, if someone is in a position where they do have pretty guaranteed sources of income, like Social Security, and maybe a pension, or maybe some distributions that they're getting from a 401k or other account, it's not as important to have that cushion, especially if they're in a really stable. And so for them, it might be more realistic to have, like, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 months of your living expenses saved up. So I think that can help people feel more comfortable too, that they don't have to try to collect this big sum of money. Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
That's okay. I was talking to a family whose loved one is working with 4 different financial institutions. So they've got a savings account here and a checking account here. And do you know of any recommendations of,
Oh,
should you simplify it to 1 or 2 institutions?
wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, it's going to be specific to each individual. I think
Yeah.
for my general guide for like a framework for making decisions about how many financial services institutions to work with is, once you get beyond 2, I always want to ask the question, what value is this third institution adding that I can't get from the first 2?
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean there's not a very good answer to that question, because there could be, but you want to ask that question because there are some folks who have like 10 logins to 10 different financial institutions. And if there are good reasons for that, fantastic. But that does make things, or can make things, more complicated when for estate planning, trying to track down all these passwords and things like that. And then just for an individual living their life, needing to manage all that as well. So I tend to think simpler is better. But what
Mhm.
simpler looks like can be different for each
Sure.
person. It might be 2 people for one, 2 institutions for one, 5 institutions for another person. It just
Mhm.
all depends. But simplicity, whatever that means to the person, I think is
Yeah,
ideal.
okay. And I think this goes way back, but evidently when you open an account, you got like a free set of dishes, or you got a free set of whatever, cookware.
Yeah.
And so there's small amounts. And so, yeah, they were thinking, let's consolidate this a little bit and pull it
Yeah.
together. And I like the idea of simpler is better, thinking about how to manage it in the future. So thank you for affirming that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I also see in the chat, there's a comment about working part-time at 73 and having some challenges with taxes. Again, taxes are complicated and specific to each individual. So that may not be the case for everybody, but there are certain situations where if you're 73 and you have required minimum distributions and you're receiving Social Security and you have extra income on top of that, that there can be some tax, I'll use the word, consequences to that. That doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do, but it does mean that you might want to consider the tax impact of that, of all of those things at once. And that, a lot of that comes from, there seems to have been a shift in financial planning. Like many years ago, there was this like thought that never pay taxes today that you can pay tomorrow. And I think that's shifted over time. So a typical financial advisor today might say, no, pay taxes today, as much as possible to have some balance. But previously, I know, because I've got some older folks who worked in accounting and other things like that in my house, like when they went through school, it was, don't pay taxes today that you can pay tomorrow. But when tomorrow comes, you might have a higher tax bill because of that, or less flexibility. So yeah, that definitely can be the case. And I think thank you for putting that in the chat. But it's going to be specific to each individual.
I just want to go back to Karen's comment. Jonathan, I really like your formula of keep it to 2 financial institutions. And if you're adding a third, ask what value that is adding. I know this has come up a lot over the past year when people were kind of chasing higher rates on CDs or institutions that were paying higher rates on savings accounts, because with higher inflation, we had some higher interest being paid out by financial institutions, but you had to really pick and choose which ones would give you the 5% or whatever. And so, yeah, I think we're finding a lot more that people are having money scattered around different accounts, different institutions. And just like Jonathan was saying, it can get so hard to manage those. And I know this came up from, again, another personal story. I cashed in my I bond recently because I got it in 22 when it was paying 9%, and now it's only paying just under 4%. So I cashed it in to see if I could get a higher rate somewhere else. And I decided to go ahead and get a CD at my financial institution, even though it wasn't paying as high as some other ones, because I didn't want to have that third account like Jonathan, that third institution that Jonathan was talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah, great questions. Any others? We're over time, but we're happy to keep talking. Like, I guess I'll speak for me. I'm a nerd about this. So as long as people want to stay on and talk about this stuff, I'm going to do it. So please, yeah, let us know your questions in the chat or feel free to unmute. And if you have to run, we understand that too, because we're already over time, just in case you have other things planned.
Yeah, Jonathan and I love this stuff. Yesterday we were talking about how fewer people are itemizing deductions because the standard deduction has gotten so high. So, and
yeah, that's a specific level of nerdiness right there.
Yeah.
When you're talking about itemized deductions for fun.
Deductions.
Yeah. But that means you all have the right people on the call to talk to.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least some of the right people. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jenny asked about high interest savings and checking accounts. Yeah, if you can find one, absolutely. The thing is the rates aren't permanent on those. They fluctuate as the Fed changes rates and as economic conditions change. So you may open a savings account that's paying 5% right now, but in a few months that might change when economic conditions change. Whereas, for example, if you buy a CD, a certificate of deposit, say you get a 12, if you're able to find a 12-month one that's paying 5%, for example, you're guaranteed that rate until that CD matures.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I'm gonna try not to get too in the weeds with this, but I told myself when you started responding, I'll say it, so I will. So high yield savings accounts can be very helpful, provide a lot of flexibility while giving you some interest. That's notable. However, there is a trend within financial services across banks and financial institutions to promote high yield savings accounts. And so then you open up the high yield savings account. But then later, as the Fed raises and changes and things like that, your savings account, the rate that you earn is no longer the highest rate that you could get with that financial institution because they've opened a different savings product to attract people into it. So they've opened let's call it a platinum account. You signed up for the platinum account, you could get 4.5% interest when you signed up. 6 months later, the platinum savings account, it gets 1% interest, but the financial institution has opened up a gold savings account. And that's the one that gets 5% interest now. But your account, which is a platinum savings account, doesn't have that high yield anymore. So I bring this up because it's been in the news and lots of people have been impacted by this. It's important to monitor your monthly statements and every so often to log into your account to see if you're getting the interest rate on your savings account that you would expect to get based on what's available in the market. So I know that can be a little complicated. Um, I hope I can clarify if I didn't say that clearly, because even I was confused by how that happened. But I just wanted to call that out because that is something that's happening right now. And there is a question in the chat.
Yeah, this is a great question about well, yeah, and just real quickly on what Jonathan just said, that's why chasing all these different accounts at different institutions is not necessarily the best move, because you might have a higher rate for just a couple months, but then it won't stay. So, but yeah, this is a great question about giving adult children money and how to protect it, so that it definitely goes to them and no one else. I mean, one way to do that is through a trust. Then you're guaranteed that it's protected just for them. But of course, trusts cost money to set up, and you need to go through an estate attorney to set those up. But that's an option. And yeah, your idea of a Roth, opening a Roth IRA account for them, that is not a bad idea. I think that's one thing with Roths is many of them have a minimum initial deposit that can range from that's sometimes 1,000 or sometimes as much as 5,000. I have seen some that have just $25 as the minimum deposit, so that would be something to think about, is what's the minimum deposit. But Jonathan, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say so. You mentioned a trust. That's one way. The other thing, because this can get pretty particular to the state and a variety of other factors, but one of the most critical things, if you want to provide a gift to someone, either while you're living or after you're passing, but not someone who's connected to that person, like a spouse or what have you, it's very important for the person who is receiving the gift to not do what they call commingling the funds. So if they move those funds into a joint account or any account that the individual that you would not like to have access to the money has actually some right to in some way, then that money is going to be accessible to that spouse or other person. So I guess long story short, if you give someone money and you don't want their spouse or somebody else to have rights to it, then it's going to be important that that person you give the money to have it in an account that's just theirs, or have it somewhere that's specifically only theirs and the other person does not have rights to. That gets very tricky and very particular, and this is why it might be worth talking to an estate planning attorney just to figure out all those stuff, because the details can get pretty complicated depending on the state, area, and all that kind of stuff. But that's important. Okay, what else? We keep coming up with good questions. So I assume someone's good, and people are hanging on. So I assume there's still more.
Yeah, we really appreciate all these questions. Stocks and bonds. Jenny, do you want to say more about what specifically you're looking for? What the question is around stocks and bonds?
Oh, good/safe investments. Yeah, so that's
Mutual funds, Jonathan? Mutual
yeah,
funds?
that's a good question. So
ETFs?
yeah, investing comes with a certain amount of volatility, or I don't know. I I I don't like to call them unsafe. Um, but it does mean you have to be aware of what your investments are, and what the likelihood of the thing you're investing in is to continue to grow or to at least remain a viable organization or business. So one way to do that is by ensuring that you invest in a way that's not specific to one individual organization or company, and you spread your investments across tons of companies by investing in like the top 500 companies in the United States or the 3,000 or more companies in the stock market completely that are available for public investing. Then if one of those companies falls out, it's kind of self-cleaning, and that the next organization is going to fit their spot and come in, right? So I guess that's one easy way, quote unquote, to do it. Is not necessarily focusing on individual investments, because that's going to come with much more volatility, but thinking more across the board of investing in a broad set of things. And then that goes back to also what we talked a little bit earlier about investing in things that tend to be less volatile, like bonds, which is where you loan money to a company or a government entity, um, or treasuries, where you loan money to the United States, which is generally thought of to be the safest place that you can put money, despite everything that you may hear in the news. But really what this is going to mean is specific to you. And it may mean you're not investing in the stock market or bond market at all, because you have the capability to do that and still reach your goals. But if you are going to invest, those are some ideas to kick around and maybe talk with a financial advisor about. Yeah, diversifying. That's the fancy word for that.
Yeah.
A diversified portfolio. That's what the financial people call it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that there are a lot of ways to do research on this. There are lots of, you know, I would always encourage people to go to federal government sites like the Securities and Exchange Commission has lots of good information on investing. Because the thing is, if you go to any commercial sites, yeah, or investor.gov, that's a great spot. Absolutely. Because if you go to commercial sites, they're going to push their products, right? Which might be fine. Those might be the products that you want, but you're not going to know the full range of options. And also, I'll just say, so I have one of those certifications that that Jonathan had on that list in the early part of the slides. So I am an accredited financial counselor, and we're allowed to give very general investment advice, not the same as like a registered representative, like he mentioned. And so I would say, yeah, in addition to looking at mutual funds or exchange traded funds that, like Jonathan was saying, among those, you might want to think about index funds, because they charge lower fees. So every time you invest in a mutual fund, there's a small expense fee that you have to pay to the people who manage those funds. And you generally want to try to get expense ratios that are less than 1%. And index funds that track the performance of an index, like the Standard & Poor's, tend to charge very, very low fees that can be like 0.2% or even less than that. So you want to make sure that most of your money is going to you to benefit you, and not to not to cover the costs of the mutual fund companies.
Yeah, good points. All good points. If you're in your wealth building phase of life, where you're working your way up the mountain so you can get to the top, which we'll call retirement, what data tends to show is that the folks who achieve their goals do so because they keep fees low, relatively speaking, and they save an appropriate amount, and they do it consistently. It's not because they pick the right in one stock that went like to the moon, and they just were really amazing at picking stocks. That's not generally what gets people to their goals and success. It can help, but it's really about investing broadly in a diversified way across a lot of companies and doing so consistently over time. All right. Okay, what else? We still have, I see like maybe eight other folks on here. And so we're gonna hang around until until it's clear there are no other questions.
Although our moderator and tech person may have other programs they have to get
Yeah,
to.
right, exactly. I was gonna
Probably let
say,
people
Amanda,
go.
do you want to kick us off?
I have time.
Oh my goodness.
Fine, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
Oh.
You
Thank you
sure?
guys very much for your time and energy, and thank you guys for coming. If there's any other questions, we can stick around, but please feel free to put more in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourselves and have a conversation. Jonathan, I think your next thing is at 11, so we have about a half hour.
Yeah, that's mine too. And I realized I need to send out the agenda for that.
Oh boy.
We're on the same
Either
thing.
that's my next thing too.
Yeah, the three of us are on
Oh,
that
okay.
same thing.
All right.